The Supreme Court just ruled that the President of the United States cannot fire a sitting Federal Reserve governor. For now. That two-word qualifier is doing enormous work, and almost no one is talking about it. Here's the question that actually matters for your portfolio. If the court left a door open on Fed independence, how wide is that door, and who gets to walk through it? The answer involves a name you should already know, Kevin Warsh, and a gold market that is already pricing in what most equity investors haven't yet computed. Let's be precise about what the Supreme Court actually decided, because the headlines are carrying two distinct stories simultaneously, and conflating them is a mistake. The court ruled that Trump cannot fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, at least not under the current legal framework and at this moment. That is the protection. But in the same decision, the court reportedly granted the administration expanded authority over other independent agencies. That is the expansion. These two outcomes living inside one ruling is not a contradiction. It is a carefully constructed legal architecture, and understanding its shape matters enormously. The Fed has historically operated under a for-cause removal standard, meaning a president cannot dismiss governors simply for policy disagreement. What the Cook ruling appears to preserve is the protection specifically for Federal Reserve Board members. What the broader ruling may have loosened is the equivalent protection at other agencies. Think regulatory bodies, oversight commissions, entities that influence everything from securities enforcement to consumer finance rules. For investors, the immediate takeaway is this. The Fed's rate-setting function appears insulated from direct political removal power for now. That, for now, matters because legal challenges evolve, appointments create new majorities, and the court can revisit its own precedents. The market had been quietly pricing in tail risk around Fed governance. This ruling compresses that tail. It does not eliminate it. Treasury yields and rate expectations did not dramatically reprice on this news, which suggests the bond market read exactly what we are reading, partial protection, not permanent resolution. Watch the spread between short and long duration carefully in the coming sessions. While the legal battle over Lisa Cook was playing out in public, the New York Times is reporting something that deserves equal attention from anyone who cares about how monetary policy actually gets made. Kevin Warsh has begun to change the Fed. Warsh is a former Federal Reserve governor, a known quantity in central banking circles, and a figure whose name is circulated in every conversation about Fed leadership succession for years. The specific nature of the reported changes is what analysis should focus on. And here is what can be said with intellectual honesty based on available reporting. Institutional change at the Federal Reserve is not trivial, and it does not happen fast. When it does happen, it tends to reflect a shift in the governing philosophy of the institution, how it weighs price stability against employment, how transparent it is with its forward guidance, how aggressively it responds to inflationary signals versus growth slowdowns. Warsh has historically been associated with a more hawkish orientation, skeptical of prolonged accommodation, concerned about moral hazard, attentive to long-run inflation credibility. If his influence is reshaping internal processes, committee culture, or communication frameworks, the downstream effect is a Fed that may be more willing to hold rates higher for longer, even under political pressure. For equity valuations, which are duration instruments at their core, a Fed with a stronger anti-inflation credibility bias means the discount rate assumption you're using in any DCF model deserves scrutiny. For bondholders, it is potentially constructive. For growth stocks, trading at elevated multiples, it is a headwind worth modeling explicitly. The Fed's independence battle is public. the philosophical transformation happening inside it is quieter and maybe more durable. Bloomberg is reporting that gold declined on fresh U.S.-Iran tension, citing inflation concerns as the mechanism. That sentence contains a counterintuitive signal worth unpacking, because most investors default to the assumption that geopolitical risk drives gold higher. Here, it did the opposite. And understanding why tells you something real about the current macro regime. Gold is not simply a fear trade. It is more precisely a real rates trade layered over a dollar credibility trade with geopolitical risk as an occasional amplifier. When U.S.-Iran tensions rise and the immediate market interpretation is inflationary, energy price pressure, supply chain disruption risk, the Fed response function becomes relevant. If the market believes the Fed will respond to an inflation shock by holding rates higher or even hiking, real yields rise. Rising real yields are directly negative for gold, which pays no income. The nominal fear bid gets overwhelmed by the real rate repricing. This dynamic connects directly to the first two sections of today's analysis. A Fed that is institutionally protected from political firing, as the Cook ruling reinforces, and potentially becoming more hawkish under Warsh's influence, is a Fed that the market may be crediting with a more aggressive anti-inflation response function. That is why gold sold off on an inflation headline rather than rallying. The market, in aggregate, is saying, we believe the Fed will fight this, and fighting it means higher real rates, which means gold underperforms. For portfolio construction, and I want to be clear, this is analytical framing, not financial advice, the implication is that gold's role as an inflation hedge is conditional on whether you believe the Fed will tolerate inflation or suppress it. Right now, the signals, legal, institutional, and market-based, are converging on suppression. That is the bet embedded in today's price action, and it is worth deciding explicitly whether you agree with it. We opened with a two-word qualifier, for now. Everything in today's analysis flows from that unresolved tension. The court protected Cook. It expanded power elsewhere. Warsh is reshaping the Fed from the inside. Gold is pricing a hawkish Fed response to geopolitical inflation. None of this is settled. The follow-up question that matters. If a future court revisits Fed governor removal protections, what happens to long-duration assets on the day that ruling drops? That is the next video. Subscribe to Synthetic Alpha so you don't miss it.